And we are live once again. We are back with a Tuesday live session, and we're back once again with Wastewater Wisdom Live. And we've got David back in the hot seat. How
it's
are
nice
you?
to be back. It feels like a long time.
It has been a while. I think it has been a few weeks. We've been off of it. We've had some in and outs of the office. You've been down with a lurgy, haven't you?
I have. I was initially on holiday, which is probably where I got the lurgy from.
Yeah.
Down. I was over in Wales, and then came back, and then I've been out of action for like 2.5 weeks. So it's nice to be back.
It's probably your longest stint out of the office, isn't it?
It has been, yeah. I was able to do some bits from home, but it was a bit weird for being away for so long. But yeah, it's good to be back. Talking wastewater treatment.
I know. I think it's the issue because now you're 30 plus, well into your 30s. It's taking down the old weaklings, isn't it?
The old weaklings. I might be on the. There is a younger generation certainly coming through the office, so I might be on the higher end of the age.
Well, that's the thing. I am like the eldest one of this younger generation coming through.
It's a bit scary.
That is awful to hear.
What you're now? 8 years?
I'm 7 in October.
7 in October. So you were the youngest when you started. For about 5 years.
I was for about 5 years until like this latest round of apprenticeship started, and then But I mean, it's fine. But then I doubt whether I was like that when I was.
We can remind you
exuberant
another time.
Anyway, we'll get into the crux of today's live session. So to start with today, we got David in the hot seat, our resident specialist on all things wastewater treatment, to discuss how to install a sewage treatment plant. I think we may have covered bits and glimpses of it during our time, but never gone into detail about it.
Yeah, so let's try and cover everything today, all together, all in one. First things first. Really, when someone's coming to install a wastewater treatment system, whether this be commercial or more often than not, it could just be a home domestic system. They aren't going to have an appreciation of the code of practice, the general binding rules, the rules and regulations that they need to conform to in terms of the discharge of their foul water from the building or the property, whichever it may be. So the first things first is to actually, if you're going to, of course, build a new house, that's quite a big investment for anyone. So it's good to spend some time thinking about where your drainage is going to go from the outset. So then, of course, you can plan that in, because it's going to be one of the initial parts of the project. All the groundworks will happen at the first stage. So if you're going to be looking at wastewater treatment or particularly rainwater harvesting, that's next week. Generally it's good to plan this out right from the outset. To get an idea of where things are going to go.
But with that planning, your architect, engineer, or whoever's doing the drawing will have that set in stone.
Very much so.
Before it starts.
For the homeowner and the project manager, basically discuss to assess where they want things to go. Having a look at the rules and regulations, getting an appreciation of where things need to be. Once they've done that, of course, they then need to really have a look at where they want things to be. So there's different types of tanks and different types of systems on the market. And of course, different manufacturers have different types of systems in terms of biological treatment. If we just talk about a septic tank, of course, you've just got gravity, inflow and outflow. With the treatment plants, you could have, certainly with the graft systems, you have airlift pipework inside the tank. So with that airlift pipework, we've got a compressor separate from the underground tank, which is blowing air down into the system to initially introduce the oxygen, which we've discussed many times before for the biological process, but of course to lift the water between chambers and out of the tank. So for where that compressor is going to be, it needs to be housed either in an internal space, in a weatherproof space, or it could be an external housing cabinet. So it's important to identify where those electronical elements are going to go in conjunction with the tank. Now, people may know with our systems that we have a pedestrian vehicle loading lid, which generally is green, discreet, goes in your back garden. And we also have a cast iron cover, of course, which is generally for vehicle loading, so you can put it into your driveway. So with the graft tank, you're not really limited in terms of where you need to put the tank. You can put it in the garden space, or you could put it in a driveway if it's going to be domestic property. If you did need to have a commercial system, you could look to sink the tank a bit lower, put a distribution plate over the top to spread load. And of course, you could then have much more heavy duty vehicles driving over it at low speed. So lots to consider in terms of tank location and control elements, whether it be a graft system or a competitive system. So something to think about. And of course, with different types of tanks, there's going to be different finish floor so access into the tank
Yep.
in terms of the manhole cover. So really important for the customer to consider, firstly, what system they want, and then what it's going to look like in their garden. So really quite a nice thing for them to think about. Then really, outside of that, I think it's just generally having an appreciation of the actual tank itself. So yeah, as I've described with the graph system, we've got this external housing cabinet where we have our air hose lines feeding down into our underground tank. You need to have where the control cabinet is, then drainage pipe work into the tank to control the system, whether that be a graph system or another. Having an appreciation of the actual manufacturer's plant, not only for the installation, but for service maintenance and generally potentially noise and smells generated from the system, which we spoke about many times before on this channel. Really have an in-depth think about where you want things to be, so it's not going to get in the way of your daily lives. So quite a nice important thing to think about. So in terms of actually going into the depths now, I can touch on this briefly. When we actually talk about I suppose the original question is how to install a wastewater treatment plant, is once you've kind of covered that initial thing, generally get an appreciation of how the system works, the rules and regulations. You then got to, of course, get the manpower on site to do it for you. So most wastewater treatment plant systems will be an underground installation. So you need to get a ground worker in to dig a hole and put the tank into the ground. You then got to have the pipe work coming down, the drainage pipe work from the toilets. And then you've got to have electrician plumb in the electrics to support the electrical elements of the system. So there is quite a lot of M&E different companies that need to come in to support you with this. So yeah, have a think about the system package, what it's going to include, locate where they are, and then get the guys on board that have got the experience to help you do a very good installation. So that's probably a nice way to wrap this up, is to really hopefully get someone on board that understands and appreciates how systems work. And of course, the installation will then go well, and then the ongoing use of the system will be as per what the manufacturer expects. So quite an important thing to do.
And kind of just touching briefly on that, when you said about there's going to be quite a few companies that would need to work together in order to install the actual plant itself. If you have, say, if you're installing the control cabinet or the control panel and compressor internally within the house itself, say in a garage or a plant room, then the electrician won't have to bring any electrical components to the outside. They can just keep it within the house. That's
very true. So yeah, if it's going into an internal building, whether it be utility room, garage, wherever it might be, where those controls are mounted need to be discussed, confirmed. So that's where it is. And of course, where the hose lines run then from that control cabinet down, the groundwork needs to know. So we've got the pipe work in place to run those hoses. So yeah, all about planning, understanding the system, and then so you've got everything in place that when the components do go in, everything's set, ready to go. Yeah.
And when it comes to installing the tank, what extra materials do they need? So for kind of the backfilling of it.
Okay, that's a fair point. A good thing to discuss. So certainly on a domestic system, we look at, of course, excavating where the tank is going to go. So generally we look at 250 to 500 mil working room around the tank. And then, of course, when we then talk about the backfill material, we generally consider the type of soil the customer has on site. So if they've got a very good self-draining soil, we would normally very much advise them to go with what Graph the main manufacturer, of course, of our products does, and that's to recommend a granular pea shingle backfill, which anything from around about 8 to 16 mil. You can go up to 20 if it's not available where you are. So that's the best way to do it. Of course, with gravel, you can then backfill in stages. You haven't got to you just get the equipment on site, and it can just go in when you're ready to go in. In relation to, of course, if you've got very heavy clay-based soil, or you've got very potential seasonal high groundwater, you do need to be a bit more cautious about this. So we'd normally look at like a lean, dry concrete mix for these type of installations. Again, when we do talk about backfill, it's very much put some water in the tank to make it a steady body, and then you put some backfill in around the tank, and of course more water, more backfill. So it's like a layered stage to ensure that the tank's going to be in place whilst we backfill around the tank. So that's just important for the customer to consider.
And once the tank's been backfilled, is it the case of emptying that water from the tank or keeping it in there?
With wastewater treatment and rainwater harvesting, the the water can very much remain in the tank. It's very good when we talk about wastewater treatment to have the water in the tank ready. Then, of course, once we get the foul water coming in, we've also got that water there present. And if we've had the compressor running, introducing the oxygen into the water, we've got very high dissolved oxygen level in that water already. So the biological process can really get going really quickly. Yeah. Okay. So keeping water in the tank is generally a good thing for the customer to consider. And of course, once you finish with the backfill, you can very much look at having some spoil, or if you're going into a driveway, you can put some tarmac down to, of course, bring it up to finished floor level. So really is quite a lot to talk about. Is there anything else you wanted me to
No,
cover,
I think you've covered it kind of from the initial hole in the ground onto the tank coming up. Obviously, once the tank's in the ground, backfilling it, keep the water in the tank to help with the biological process. And like you say, if it's going in the garden, they can then add some spoil on top of that gravel level past the shoulder of the tank to then bring up to the ground level where the lid is flush with the grass.
Yeah, so where the lawn's going to finish it. Yeah. And of course, the other thing really to touch on, I think, hopefully to round this off, because I'm going on as always, is of course to consider your discharge options.
Yep.
So whether you're going into ground or if you're going into a watercourse, because we're talking about a wastewater treatment plant here, have an idea of where your discharge is going to go be. If you are going to go into ground, have a look at the percolation rates, the infiltration rates of the soil, just to check how big the drainage solution needs to be off the back of the treatment plant.
Perfect. I think you have rounded off well there. Cool. Don't worry. I mean, you tried to round it off a couple of times, but I had to bring you back in. But anyway, I think that covers all of how to install a sewage treatment plant, and it's gone very in depth about the installation process and what you need to consider when you're installing one. And now it's time for the project recap for this week. So we have a one-to-clean installation, I believe.
Yep.
And what's unique about this one is they're discharging into our infiltration tunnels to use as a soakaway.
Yes. So this is quite something that we do quite a bit here. It's not something that's really considered as an option. Now, as the guys can see from the photos, when we talk about discharging into ground from a wastewater treatment system, the code of practice, which is 6297, if everyone wants to have some nighttime reading, basically asked us to look at incorporating a drainage field, which is basically perforated pipe in a herringbone loop to discharge the effluent water over an area. And then when you talk about a drainage mound, you're pretty much elevating that drainage field up into a mound, and you'd consider a drainage mound if you had very poor percolation rates.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what we've done with this customer here is that they have done the percolation test results to obtain the VP value, which is how fast the water will disperse into the soil.
Yep.
And then basically what we do is we take that VP number and we put it through a calculation to work out how many of the infiltration tunnels that we use to disperse this foul water they will require. Mm-hmm. And when we do tunnel calculations, we firstly look at how fast that water will percolate away in that soil. So we're very much talking about the percolation rate of the soil. It's important for people to remember this when you talk about percolation. You're doing tests on how far it disperses into the soil. So you can use that value for how far, of course, whether it's going through a perforated pipe or if it's going through a tunnel. It's kind of the same calculation. We're just kind of using the tunnel to our advantage. Now, the tunnel basically has two huge advantages versus a perforated pipe. Yep. When you consider a perforated pipe, you're thinking about a 4-inch pipe which has got either holes or slots cut into it to disperse that foul water along the pipe, and it's usually cut in at basically 12, 3, 6 and 9 o'clock. And basically that kind of limits how much water can discharge from that pipe. It's only, it works out to be around about 4%, I think, on most pipes of the surface area, so a very small fraction. With the tunnel, we need to consider the whole basically side of the tunnel as our discharge area. So that is a huge surface area versus the perforated pipe where the water can discharge out, which of course is very advantageous in terms of space.
Yep.
Of course, with the tunnel, it's basically a completely open structure. So what we generally advise customers to do is to have an inspection pipe down into it. So the tunnel is wrapped in a textile, a fabric cloth around it. And this basically makes it so any of the gravel backfill that goes around the tunnel you can see from the photo on the left there, basically remains within the tank. So if they did need to do some maintenance, some servicing, some inspection, some jetting, all of that basically remains within that tunnel. And of course, it can then be jetted back up into the treatment plant. Of course, it can then be desludged out. So the longevity of the tunnel system due to this maintenance and
element
access to it
yeah,
is really, really good versus a perforated pipe. Now, you can, of course, jet a perforated pipe down, but of course, once that soil gets saturated with over time, over 8-10 years, basically it could be that you have to move that drainage field, or you have to basically dig down, take it out, and put a fresh
new
one
one
back in again. So the tunnel has a very good benefit from that aspect as well. And of course, with the tunnels, with their volumetric design, we've very much talked about so far the percolation rate of how fast the water will discharge in the soil. So if we're reducing the area, because of course we've got the surface area of the tunnel to accommodate that, but we've also got the capacity of the tunnel. Now, something which is a bit more unique to certainly the graph or the graph technology which they use within our treatment plants. So we use sequence batch reactor technology, which is a very good cleaning performance. But as it kind of says in the name, we're treating the water in batches. So we're treating water, and then we're discharging it of a certain volume in one go. And of course, we allow for more inflow because we've created space within the treatment plant. We treat that water and then discharge again. Now, as we're discharging quite a lot of water in one go, the quality of it is very good because we have quite a long sedimentation phase prior to discharge. Of course, with all that volume being discharged in one go, it's very good to have capacity within the drainage solution to accommodate that water. Now, with each tunnel being 300 litres, you can see quite quickly how even with a relatively large sequence batch reactor treatment plant, we can accommodate that volume in a tunnel much better than you would do, of course, in a perforated pipe. So again, a huge advantage of using the tunnel over perforated pipe, particularly with the SBR sequence batch reactor treatment technology. So we can, of course, use a perforated pipe with a graft system. It's just the tunnel has this huge additional benefit for us. So where customers might want to consider using tunnels is generally if they've got limited space on site. So if they've bought a new property, or they're replacing an existing drainage field off a septic tank, whatever it might be, and they've got very limited space to incorporate a new drainage solution, a tunnel solution might be very beneficial for them. Now, what I haven't said so far is that tunnel solutions don't fall within the code of practice currently. So you will need to get permission to use this type of solution. So you'll need to speak to the building officer, the guy that's going to sign off the project, to see if you can use this solution for your project. Hopefully, we've given people enough information today, encouragement to use the tunnel solution. It's a hugely beneficial solution, not in terms of how it operates, how it's going to be easily maintained, its longevity. And of course, with the added bonus of it potentially being a smaller area to incorporate than what you would have for a herringbone solution, it has really great advantages for the customer when they're particularly limited on space. So hopefully we can get this approved within the code of practice in the near future. It's not currently, so do seek permission if you want to use this solution going forwards. As you can see, this customer here of ours has basically inquired about using the tunnel solutions. They've got permission to do so. They've installed it, and of course, it's been signed off and completed now. So, yeah, this particular customer has got approval for it. This is of course, with the 4 tunnels that were supplied with this one. This is of course a domestic application. You can use tunnels on commercial applications as well. So don't think this is just limited to domestic applications. So, yeah, we have done certainly a handful of projects where we've used a vast majority of tunnels to support. I think the largest one we've done is a 150 pop system. So, yeah, really nice solution to consider with customers for discharging of foul water from sewage treatment plants. Bear in mind, it's sewage treatment plants where we've got a very good quality of water being discharged from the system already. So
perfect. That's a wonderful recap, something that we haven't touched on before on a Wastewater Live session. But now it is time to answer any questions that have come in during today's live session. So we're just loading up on the screen in front of us now. Where does the waste from a septic tank go to? That screen is tiny. We need to get that one replaced. That's a real good test.
Okay, right. Okay. Probably there's 2 answers to this question, so I'll quickly cover both. Firstly, of course, when you talk about water from a septic tank, there's two ways. There's the waste will either go into the ground after the treatment plant via a drainage field. So that will generally be the effluent water at the top of the tank. So septic tanks are usually gravity-fed solutions where the water remains static in the tank. So water discharge will go into our drainage field where you need to have the percolation rate from the soil to treat it that stage further. The gathered waste, the collected waste in the septic tank, so over the 6 to 12 months that we've got this tank in place, the sludge storage will remain within our septic tank. Of course, that needs to be emptied out, otherwise it's going to get very, very high in our tank. So it's important to have a basically desludging company to come in, empty that solid waste out of the tank to take off to municipal treatment works. So this is where generally most wastewater will go, which is plumbed into the foul water network will go. And there it's basically treated. And of course, it can then be used back in industry for other things like fertilization and stuff. So, firstly, discharge to ground. Secondly, that waste, that held waste needs to be emptied out via a desludging company.
And as per the recent changes to the general binding rules a couple of years ago, there are a lot of septic tank discharging into watercourses, which is no longer the case and need to be changed to discharge into ground.
Yes, so there's two options which we cover quite heavily within our CPD. If someone's got an existing septic tank, as you say, going into a watercourse, either they implement a drainage field off the back of that septic tank so it's going into ground. If they don't have the option to go into the ground because the percolation rate of the soil is poor, they would then need to, of course, look to upgrade into a wastewater treatment plant, which still conforms with the code of practice. As you've got that much better quality of effluent water being discharged from the tank, they can continue to discharge to the watercourse.
Perfect. That answers that one. Then the next question we have coming up on screen. Does a tank need a pump in order to pump the waste from it, or can it be discharged, or when it's discharged from it, or is it usually gravity fed?
Oh, okay. Yes. Hopefully, they've kind of answered the options in the question there. There's certainly, I think, 3 ways that water can be manipulated out of a tank. Firstly, when we talk about septic tanks, we generally look at a gravity discharge, so the water level in the tank will remain static. So that's gravity. We can then move towards something which we certainly do within our graft treatment plants, where we incorporate airlifts, where we're basically siphoning water. So again, you could call this pumping, I suppose, in some way, where we're encouraging the water to be lifted up and out of the tank, so that we can actually do basically a lift to the same level as the inflow, or you could raise it a couple of feet, so you could incorporate what we call a raised discharge. So that's more siphoning, pumping, using the air compressor itself, so standard system components to do a bit more work for us and lift the water up and out of the tank. And then it's kind of what you touched on there within the question. There's a electronic pump element. So this could be very much incorporated into the septic tank or the treatment plant itself, where you put a pump on a float switch into the tank, or it could be an external pump chamber. And generally you would incorporate a pump where you need to lift the water somewhere. So if you've got your garden area or your car park, wherever your tank's going, and basically you need to lift the water up and away from the treatment plants, you would of course need to incorporate a pumped solution to achieve that. Now there's lots of different types. I suppose on a domestic level you could just have a standard small pump chamber, but for commercial applications you would of course upgrade that to a pump station where you'd have quite a bit more safety factors built into it. You'd have a control panel, 2 pumps, warnings and all this sort of stuff. So that is kind of the third element. Generally, manufacturers try and keep away where they can from a pump solution, as we're incorporating an electronic element into the solution. Of course, we don't get them so often anymore, but certainly if you're out in the country, you might have problems with like power cuts and stuff. So of course, if you have got no power to that pump, you're not going to have a pump discharge. So where you can try and keep away from electronic pumping elements, the better. Certainly if you have a pumped element in your treatment plant, if you've got your pumped element in your treatment plant, of course, you've got quite a bit of hands-on maintenance that you would need to do if you were to have a problem with the pump. So yeah, three different things to look at. Try and stay away from a electronic pumped outlet where you can, but there are some situations where it's a must. So, of course, customers do need to consider it. But yeah, I would encourage people to look at an external pump station just due to access, maintenance, and servicing. So if you did need to do any repair works, it's going to be much easier for them to carry out.
Perfect. That answers that one. Then the next question we have come in is, can a septic tank freeze?
Septic tank freeze. Okay,
Yes.
Interesting question. I would certainly hope not in this country. Basically, if you are with septic tanks and treatment plants, the idea of keeping them underground is to give them some protection from the frost. As the soil will give them a natural insulation layer to prevent the water in the tank from going very cold.
Yeah.
Now, it's not something that people will think about, but when you discharge water from your property, it's going to be relatively warm. It still feels cold to us, but compared to, of course, freezing temperatures in the ground, it's a lot warmer. And if you think about your bath, shower water, your water from your washing machine and dishwasher, that could be anything from like 30 degrees plus, depending on how hot you think. So that, of course, keeps the natural water temperature within the treatment plants quite warm. When we do talk about biological processes within the tank, to get a very good treatment performance, we need to have that water really above 12 degrees C. So again, something to consider. If the water level is getting down to near freezing, then we've got a serious problem with the biological process in the treatment plant. So if it is getting below that, you generally need to start thinking about options to insulate the tank. So that's to consider. It's also something that a customer might want to think about. There are various manufacturers that do something called shallow dig septic tanks. Of course, with a shallow dig tank, you're more likely to have the tank closer to ground level. Of course, if that is the case, it's more susceptible to getting colder temperatures in the tank. So just something to bear in mind, that the water level may be affected. But as what I touched on right at the beginning, I think certainly within the UK, we're not going to see temperatures cold enough to really get the water inside the tank freezing. But if customers are concerned about it, hopefully what I've touched on there in terms of, the water coming into the tank, hopefully gives them some reassurance that it won't happen. But if they are very concerned about it, go with a deeper installation, and of course, insulate the tank if you feel like it's
Potentially going to happen.
Potentially going to happen. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying that. And then on to the next question that we've had come in during today. How do you maintain a sewage treatment plant?
Oh, wow. Okay. Lots to consider here. I suppose
break it into bite-sized chunks.
Bite-sized chunks. We're going to 2 bite-sized chunks, which won't bite. They're not going to be bite-sized.
Oh, great.
First things first. It's important that the tank is, of course, emptied on a regular basis. So whether it be a septic tank or a treatment plant, gaining an understanding of what the desludging interval is. That was a bit of a mouthful. So depending on the manufacturer, you may have a 6-month window that you need to get the tank emptied. It could be that you have 12 months. It could be 24 months. So whatever system you have, speak to the manufacturer, get an idea of what the desludging level is. That is probably number one. And of course, get a desludging vehicle to come in on that interval to get the system desludged so the continued operation of the biological process can happen well. That's point one. The second thing, of course, is what we talk about quite a lot when we do our accredited service provider training, which is the main point of it, I suppose. And that's to actually get an engineer on board with coming down and servicing the system, getting an understanding of not only the biological process, how well the treatment plant is performing in terms of the effluent quality of discharge, but also check, of course, on the working components. So it's kind of why we have the training here, is that we invite people along. We generally have a dedicated day where we have 4 people here. We give them an understanding of not only how our systems work, but of course, what they need to understand in the biological process. I think people basically expect septic tanks to work miracles. Treatment plants to work miracles. all they're there to do is basically is to promote the biological process within the tank. When we think about any sort of living thing, they need three things to survive: food, oxygen, and of course water. Now, within the foul water treatment plant alone, we've got the water and the food coming in from the black water, and of course all we're doing to promote the growth and the activity of the living microorganisms
Is introducing oxygen.
is of course introducing the oxygen. So it's really important that we give the service engineers that understanding that the treatment plant is there to increase the oxygen level, and it needs to do that well for the biological treatment plant to work. So yeah, firstly, analysing the system performance, checking things where things need to be, but also gaining an understanding of is the treatment plant actually achieving what we want it to do?
Yes.
Is really important. So I think those are the two things that generally need to be covered. Firstly, discharging the tank as per the manufacturer's regulations, and something for them to consider on a domestic level. Get an engineer in who knows about the system, is willing to do the checks on the electronic equipment and the effluent quality. And I think, yeah, that's pretty much it. And hopefully it's nice for the homeowner to gain an understanding of how the treatment plant works.
Yep.
It's so often that we have people ask the same questions, and really if the customer takes the initiative. We talked right at the beginning of today about what do you need to consider when you install a wastewater treatment system. Understanding how the treatment process works, whether it be one of our systems with a compressor diffusers and airlift discharge, or whether it's going to be a media-based system, whether it's going to be rotational disc, is it going to be electronic pump system, all these sorts of things. Having an understanding of how the oxygen level in the tank is being increased. Once you've got that there, of course, you can then understand really how the system can be maintained successfully. On a domestic level, the homeowner could potentially look after the majority of this themselves. On a commercial application, it's more likely to be adopted by a council, and they will look after it for you. But even so, it's important for them to really understand the biological process that the treatment plant is performing, whether it's a suspended aeration filter, whether it's SBR, whatever it might be. Having an understanding of how the treatment plant works is so important, so we can ensure we're protecting the environment. At the end of the day, that's what we're here to do. With biological wastewater treatment systems, we're here to promote the growth of bacteria, so we get a very good quality of water being discharged on systems to protect the environment. So that's the whole point. People need to understand that. And yeah, wastewater treatment plants, as simple as they are in terms of just introducing more oxygen, that's all they're there to do. And that really helps get the really good quality of effluent we need to discharge and protect our environment.
Perfect. Very heated on that. You're very passionate on that.
Every single time I do a CPD, I'm like, it just kind of drills home the important message that's
perfect
that we want to promote here in the industry.
And I think that's a very good point to finish on, because I think that's it. We don't have any more questions.
Good.
For you to get really passionately into.
I'm sorry.
Answer.
It's
fine.
It's difficult.
But that is it for today's live session. We hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to come and listen to David passionately go on about how we need to protect the environment with our wastewater treatment systems, which is obviously what we're here to do.
Super.
To prevent the sewage of ruining the UK water courses by preventing any sewage going into it. So, David, thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much for having me.
You can take 5 minutes to calm down. You can have a breather before you get back to your desk.
I might need to go make myself another cup of tea.
Go have a walk around the block. But anyway, thank you once again for joining in, and we'll see you in next week's session. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your week and take care.
Thank you very much.